students directly about his experience during the Second World War. 13-year-old Ike Alterman lost most of his family when the Nazis invaded Poland and began rounding up Jewish people. His mother, father, sister and little brother didn't survive. After enduring 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, he was forced onto the death marches as the Germans retreated from the advancing Red Army. But he was rescued by Allied forces and flown to England, where he spent 6 months in a refugee camp in Windermere before moving to Manchester and gradually establishing a career as a jeweller. I sat down with him. He's now 94, alongside the young students, Vlad and Sonia, who came to the UK from Ukraine in April and are now studying at a truly brilliant school, Wellington it's called, in Altrincham. You'll hear from them later, but first, listen to Ike. Why did you decide that you wanted to talk about your early life?
Why? Well, that's part of me. It's part of me.
But for many years you didn't talk about what happened.
No, I couldn't bring myself to talk, not even to my family.
Why was that?
Because it was too raw to talk about it. And I tried to protect my family because there's a lot of hurting things. And as a family man, I tried to protect them.
How do you feel now, Ike, when you stand in front of school children, young people, and you see their faces? They stand up and they applaud you.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel that I'm doing something for the younger generation, to educate them about what's been happening.
How old were you, Ike, when you discovered that people wouldn't like you because you were Jewish?
Oh, you got that even at school, when you started the Polish school and all that. Kids used to say to you, like, Żydzi do Palestine, Jews go to Palestine. You know, but anti-Semitic things. Yet on the other hand, you had to bribe them. Yes, I want matzah. Matzah. Or sweets to bribe them with all that. To leave you alone. You see, in Poland, it was a Christian Catholic environment, and they were brought up and brought their children up that Jews have killed Jesus. I wasn't even there. yeah. So why do you hate me? But I've been brought up that way, to hate the Jews because of their upbringing, that the Jews have killed Jesus.
So you were 10, 11 years old when the war broke out? 1939?
About 12 or 13 years old.
What did that mean for your family in September 1939?
It meant that everything, once the Germans occupied Poland, everything was stopped for you. All the different restrictions that came in. Not only just my family, but all Jewish people were being treated the same way.
How was that? What did they do to Jewish businesses?
They closed them down. The Nazis used to stand outside Jewish businesses or shops or so and stop the people from going in. That was right away.
Did your dad try and explain what was going on? Could he explain what was going on?
He couldn't explain. I was only a child. You see, as a child, we didn't know a great deal what was going on in life because you relied on your parents to see to all that. You were immediately in the house or just outside playing with the other children. But once the war broke out, all that is gone.
When did you first begin to realise, Ike, that life was changing and your life would never be the same again?
As soon as the Germans occupied, yeah.
You had been bullied for being Jewish at school.
Yeah.
But once the Germans invaded, everybody who was Jewish was being bullied by the Nazis.
Oh, yeah.
What was happening in the streets?
In the streets. Well, if you saw a German, you had to take your cap off or try to avoid them by going another way, all that. Because sometimes what they used to do, they used to walk about with Alsatian dogs, the Germans. And also they had these long whips with the leather on the bottom of it, and they used to go and used to say to the dogs, "Jude!"
Jewish.
And the dogs used to chase you down and tear you apart.
And that was happening on the streets in
That's
Poland.
what was happening on the streets.
You spoke to the school earlier and you talked about the day that your whole family were lined up in the square.
Mm-hmm.
And quite understandably, it's still incredibly painful for you to talk about that.
It is, but I've got to remember them. I've got to remember them, tell a story.
What happened that day, Mike?
The Germans brought a law out. All Jews must congregate on a certain square. You could only take with you what you can carry in your hands. Everything else had to be left behind. So we congregated there, and we were all in about 4 or 5 deep, waiting to be counted. We stayed there for a long time. Eventually, the SS man appeared, and he started to count. I was behind my father, who told me to stand on my tiptoes to make me look a bit taller or more important. Next to my father was my mother, my sister, and my little brother. And he started to count like that. And then he went like that. All those to the left of my father, that was my mother, my little brother, my sister, were marched out of that square with rifles behind them, marched them out, never to be seen again. I was left with my father, and we were between the committee and the part of the ghetto there. My father disappeared. He disappeared.
We'll listen to more of Ike Alterman after we get the news headlines. Any comments, thoughts, you know the numbers, 85058 on the text, or you can WhatsApp us 08085 909 693. We will return and hear not just Ike Alterman, but 2 young people, teenagers, because of course Ike ended up here in the UK as a refugee. And now there are many refugees coming to this country. And two of them, teenagers, came from Ukraine in April. And it was quite extraordinary to be in a room at the school, Wellington in Altrincham, the northwest of England, to witness the three of them together, completely different generations, but understanding of each other's dilemmas and the pain of having to leave the country that you were born in. Now, before we went to the news, we were hearing from Ike Alterman, the 94-year-old, soon to be 95, Holocaust survivor, speaks to young people around the northwest of England about his horrific experiences during the Second World War as part of a programme which is called My Voice, which is run by the Fed charity.
So I was left on my own, and I was sent to my first concentration camp called Blishin. All on my own. I managed to get a job in the kitchen. I was working there, and I developed typhus. So I don't know how long I was out or what, but instinct told me to get out, and I made my way into the kitchen. And in the kitchen, I noticed the Obersturmbannführer with all this regalia and this revolver. I walked in. I asked him for his revolver. I was obviously delirious. I didn't know what I was doing. And all of a sudden, he started screaming, "Was hat gesagt?" And there was a Jewish capo in the camp there who got in between him and me, and he said to the Obersturmbannführer that I was crazy. So he saved my life. I'm a lonely child, hanging about. I don't know anybody. It's quite a few times I wish I'd have gone with the rest of the family. Somebody was looking out for me. And I think it's my late mother. She's been my guardian angel.
Those moments when you wanted for your life to end,
Yeah.
what was it that kept you going?
I don't know. One day in the camp was all electric wires, but you were able to walk about a little bit at times. But one day I walked towards the electric wire and I saw one of my aunties on the other side of the wire, and I had a piece of bread left, and I threw it over the wire. And she said to me, "Your father was here yesterday, exactly where you're standing now. But they sent him to Buna, which was a works camp that was producing things for the German army. And I found out after the war that they sent him to Buna works, and that's where he died from slave labour."
Listening to Ike with me were two teenagers, Sonia and Vlad, who both came to the UK in April to escape Russia's invasion of Ukraine and are now studying at Wellington School in Manchester. Sonia, can you tell me about where you grew up?
So I was born in Luhansk, which is on the border of Ukraine and Russia. Well, in Ukraine. I was growing up there with my parents, living my best childhood. But then in 2014, something changed because it was kind of a first part of Russian invasion into Ukraine. So I had to move out of my home city with my parents. And all my grandparents and all my other family are still there in this occupied territory. So I moved into Bucha, which we all know for not the best reasons, obviously. And I lived there with my parents. And about a year and a half before the war started, we moved into Kyiv, and we were really lucky that we did that, because my house where I lived in Bucha is absolutely destroyed. It does not exist anymore. Yeah.
So when did you come to the UK?
I came to UK April 11th with my mom, and she stayed with me for about 4 or 5 months, but then she went back to Ukraine because, well, obviously my father is there and she has work there, so she just had to go home. Yeah, and I stayed here. She came for about 2 weeks, about like a couple of months ago, and then she came for a week again, a month ago. I'm trying to kind of think like a grown-up person, and I do understand what's going on, so I'm not gonna be like dying from that and crying every single day because I have to live my life, because I can't change anything. That's how I'm trying to think of it. Of course, everybody has some hard times, and I do as well, but I'm just trying to be as positive as possible.
Good for you, wonderful. Just keep fighting. It's your life. You make the best of it. You can. And God help you.
Talking of God, you said something very interesting when you addressed the school earlier, Ike, which is when a rabbi came to visit you when you were in England. And the rabbi asked you about religion, didn't he? And what did you say to the rabbi?
He told me to be thankful to the Almighty that I managed to survive and all this, that, and to be a good Jew and all that. And I questioned him. I said, I come from a very religious family. I had a very religious upbringing. Where was the Almighty when all these atrocities were being committed? 6 million people burned off the face of the earth. What? Because they were Jews. And his answer was to me, who are we to question the Almighty's ways? Where was he to help people, to save their lives or whatever? He couldn't give me an answer. Of course he couldn't give me an answer. The truth is, they know that the Almighty didn't do anything. Some people, they were so religious, all they lived for is to please the Almighty all their lives. It makes you think, is there an Almighty there or not? We will never know. But it made me doubt. It made me doubt.
Vlad, can you tell us about your story, how you came to be in the UK?
Well, I came to UK in April in this year. I came with my mom and my brother. Yeah, we live here in a pretty house. So I came to this school, this very good school, and I like to be here.
You heard Ike, both of you, talk about him having to leave his family, to be split up from his family. Can you see, Sonia, a connection between the experiences that you've both been through?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, it's quite similar, but I'm very lucky not to lose my parents because I know they're alive, and even if they are not answering the phone because there is no electricity in Ukraine at all right now, I'm just always hoping for the best, and I know when there is electricity, my mom definitely will call me and will make sure that I'm fine, and I will make sure that she's fine, and Dad. So the experiences are similar in the way that I don't live with my parents, but my parents are alive, and I'm very, very thankful and very happy for this reason.
You've heard Ike talk about the difference between Germans and Nazis. As young people, 16 and 15, who've had to leave your home, how do you both feel about Russians, Vlad?
Basically, I feel like this Russian generation always brainwashed. Like, he believed all what Putin said. Yeah, and I feel most of them decided to go to war in Ukraine and do what he said.
It's a very complicated question because it's hard to answer. For example, do you hate Russians or not? It actually depends a lot because, yeah, this generation of Russians, like all the people that live there right now, doesn't matter what age, they are brainwashed. They think in the way that they are told to think, so it's really hard to judge. But obviously, I think that when it all stops and finishes, younger people will be... They will know that Russia was wrong, and I think we will forgive them at some point, because it's the matter of time, I'd say. It's a really complicated question, and I don't know how to answer it right now, but yeah, that's how I feel about this.
Can you tell us about writing letters?
So we were learning about Ike's story in school, and everybody had to write a letter to him, and we were told that he will definitely receive them. And I just came into school at that time, and I just thought, what would I ask myself in about 20 years? What will I be asked? And what would I like to answer? Because, for example, I asked this quite an incorrect question, which was saying, do you hate Germans? But that's what I want to know. What will I feel in 10, 20 years?
Ike, what did you think of the letters that you received from young people?
Most of the people are very, very expressive with me. I worked hard. I was very proud of what I have achieved over the years. It doesn't matter how bad it is today, tomorrow is another day.
Soon you'll be 95 years old, but it's important that your story remains. But sadly, with each passing year, we lose people such as yourself. How do we make sure, Ike, that human beings do not do this again to each other? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen when, sadly, there won't be people like you who can meet Sonia and Vlad? Now, Sonia and Vlad will never forget today, will you? You'll never forget today.
That is why, while we can, is to let other people know to do some of the work. Other people, younger people, to do the work, the groundwork.
This is a good point to bring Rafi Bloom in from the Fed, because this is exactly the work that you have to do, isn't it? This is the point.
The Fed is the largest Jewish social care charity in Greater Manchester. And My Voice is a unique project that sits as part of the Fed, within the Fed, to record the whole life stories of Holocaust survivors and refugees who came to Greater Manchester, who settled in Greater Manchester after the war. What makes it unique is that not only is it the whole life stories, because many Holocaust testimony stories just focus on the experience of the survivor during the war, but that they're written in the first person, so they're not ghost written. They're told to a team of specially trained volunteers, who, by the way, won the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service in 2021, which we're very proud of. And more important than that, because it sits as part of a social care charity, we offer a very holistic wraparound service to the survivors and refugees who tell their stories, because as we heard from Ike, often many survivors don't tell their stories until very much the later years of their life. And when they do, there's often a lot of trauma associated with telling that, not just for themselves, but for their families, for their children and grandchildren who had no idea that their parent or grandparent suffered so horrendously during the war years, or were hidden children, or had to leave their parents behind on the kinder transport, never to see them again before the war, at the beginning of the war. So the expertise that we can bring to that as a social care charity makes it a whole wraparound service. And as time goes on, as you've just said, it's more important than ever. We've published 34 life story books so far, with another 10 in production. It's hugely important that those messages and those stories are told. If people have the opportunity and the privilege to hear from a survivor like Ike, you are hearing living, breathing testimony of the worst crime ever committed by man, the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis. If you can't hear from a survivor, then the next best thing is to read their story, to take that story and to share it, because we can never let the world forget. And there's always the danger that with every passing year, people forget. That's just human nature. So we are starting to move into an education enabling phase of the project, which means that we take survivors like Ike to various institutions, like the Wellington School here today. I took him to Wigan Athletics Academy, Football Academy, a couple of weeks ago. We're also developing relationships with other institutions, and a Guardian project where we take young people, sixth formers, to each take on board a story of one of our survivors, learn that story, where possible, sit with the survivor, sit with the person and speak to them, but take on the commitment to share that story in any form that they see fit, whether that be through speech, through drama, through art, so that we can enable that the stories are told. And then lastly, to use the books in schools like they've done here, so that students can take parts of the story and learn not just that the Holocaust was a huge number, a number that most people can't even comprehend, but to start looking at the individual stories of the survivors and the victims of the Holocaust, because it's only then that you can put that real human feel to the story.
Lastly, Vlad and Sonia and Ike, you're all refugees. What does that word mean to you, refugee?
It's kind of a complicated question as well. I'd say refugee is a person who, for some unfair reason, had to leave their home and had no other option. But that's how it is, and I think we just have to take it how it is and live on.
I'm fully agree with Sonia. It's like Ike said, tomorrow is our day, and we need to live like our life.
I personally don't feel as a refugee. The times that I've been here, I feel as good as any Englishman. And if any Englishman stands up to me and tells me that he's better than me, I tell him to. There's nobody better than me. I brought my children up and said, don't go through life worrying about other people and all that. Do your best that you can. Don't consider yourself any better than anybody. But also remember, the other people are not worse than you. Treat them as if you like to be treated yourself.
Ike Alterman and Vlad and Sonia there. I'd like to thank Sam and Honey Solomon for inviting me to Friday night dinner, where I met Rafi Bloom from the Fed Manchester, and Rafi was the one, of course, that introduced us to Ike and to the school where he was doing it, to Mr. Bealey, the head teacher at Wellington School, and also to Mr. Gershler, who is the head of history of politics at Wellington School in Altrincham, for allowing us to come in and then speak to Ike and those two extraordinary young people, Vlad and Sonia. Let's speak now to Ilya Yablokov, who is a lecturer in digital journalism and disinformation at the University of Sheffield. Ilya, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Nihal.
Could you give us a sense of the rise of anti-Semitism in Russia and Eastern Europe?
Well, it's a very peculiar case, Russia and Eastern Europe. Whilst in Central and Eastern Europe, anti-Semitism was very much present in the 90s and 2000s. The particular case is Poland, Hungary, and Romania. In Russia, especially in the 2000 and 2010, the number of anti-Semitic cases went down. And that was partly because of the economic growth that was seen in Russia. But in the second part of the 2010s, and especially during the conflict in Ukraine and during the lockdown, so when economy and kind of social and political conflicts are on the rise, the number of cases of anti-Semitism again went up and still is going up.
Also, can I ask you about Holocaust denial and how social media, the internet, the dark web, for instance, 4chan, Reddit, for instance, are contributing to that?
It's incredible. I mean, the amount of disinformation on those areas of the internet which are not particularly open for usual ordinary users, but only those who are looking for a specific kind of information. This is a safe haven. We hardly have, penetration to these areas like darknet, like closed groups on WhatsApp or Telegram, where these ideas are brewing, and at times these ideas even have violent outcomes. So I don't think it's a problem that has been resolved so far, and I don't think we are ever close to resolve this issue.
Ilya, I only have less than a minute left, but I'm worried that as the generation who survived the Holocaust die out, there are so few left. How do you think we can make sure that the disinformation doesn't win?
Well, first of all, it should be education. There should be much wider education. We know from the polls that some people in Europe, in the UK, simply don't know about the Holocaust. And the second thing, that should definitely be punishment for any sort of anti-Semitic and xenophobic statements, because otherwise people will just ignore following these rules.
Ilya Yablokov, who is lecturer in digital journalism and disinformation at the University of Sheffield. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And like I said again, thank you to the staff at Wellington School in Altrincham, and also very much to Ike Alterman, an extraordinary 94-year-old Holocaust survivor who is making it his mission to make sure the next generation do not forget.